Oh, it's being recorded now. Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry.
It's fine.
Okay, yeah, maybe we can start.
All right.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to Developh Student Tech Talks, a series where we seek to spotlight the journeys and work with students in both creative and tech fields. Because even if we're students, we still have something important to share. Today, we'll be featuring Pauline Baterna for her talk to be human-centered. Pauline Baterna is the User Experience Society Secretary General and Developer Student Club's Loyola Chief Human Resources Officer. Previously, she was an internal vice president at Developh. Today in her talk, we'll be learning about the psychology and ethics of UX design and research, from theory and practice to realistic design decisions. Let's give a warm of applause. Hand of applause for Pauline Baterna.
Thank you so much, Bianca. Thank you so much, Gia. Actually, thank you so much for Developh for this opportunity. Because first and foremost, I don't think I'd be here if I never encountered Developh. So, it means a lot to me that I was invited for this. Like this talk, it's actually more of like a brief way to go through being human-centered, so UX design, those kinds of aspects. So it's especially important for people who are starting out their journey in UX. So whether you're actually a designer or a researcher or both, it's really important to have a kind of awareness and care and to approach your journey with introspection. So you have to have like the desire for like knowledge to supplement your decisions, not just as a designer, but actually as a fellow human being. So to be human-centered, actually, I would say you should reflect on all aspects of UX. So this is not just in terms of like the design, but how you go through the research aspect itself. So I'll go over very briefly on the mindset, the communication practices, ethics, and inclusivity. So first of all, mindset. So to be a good UX practitioner, it's good to be a reflective practitioner. So number one is humility and open-mindedness. So for me and for the UX researcher, hubris would be the biggest sin of a UX researcher. To come into a room with a glaring assumption of what your user will say or do is easy like what mistakes you can make. And as much as it's easy to say, it's not exactly easy to just let go of these kinds of assumptions when you enter into the room. So even if you're part of the user group itself, it's incredibly important to come in without assumptions and with the open-mindedness to find out more about the user. So inherently, UX practitioners must be truth seekers, and they have to strive to unravel the truth and to teach these new knowledge to the design team. Second would be sincerity. So sincerity is not just for yourself as a practitioner, but also for our users. So how sincere are you in contributing to a design that is for your users? How involved are you, both practically and ethically, in designing for them? So as you meet new users to understand more, the compilation of your data as a UX researcher should not just be a metric to you, but a reflection of real behavior by real people who change and evolve over time. So sincerity in your journey in UX is supplemented by your willingness and eagerness to learn more and to know more about UX itself. So it's ever evolving users and understanding the responsibility of being a UX practitioner. So next is communication. The first I want to tackle is how do you communicate with your users? So when you communicate with your users, you may unknowingly do certain practices that don't actually do well for users, either in online, so for example, surveys, or even in terms of face-to-face interviews. You have to understand the kind of small implications, psychologically wise, in the way that you speak, in the way that you address to them, and the way that you ask your questions, very most importantly. So for example, let's talk about like the precision effect. So imagine you have a table with choices A to D. Let's say it's a shirt. You can place exactly the exact same design and this quality for all 4 choices. And most people would choose D several times over than A anyway. But even if you ask them why you chose it, they'll still find ways to justify their decision. they'll say like, oh, but it felt lighter than the rest. Like the cloth felt a lot more easier to breathe in, kind of thing, even if it's exactly the same thing. So same goes as well for surveys that use this kind of format. Not to say that it's completely ineffective, but it would not be one of the most recommended things to do, considering that this position effect is an aspect that is psychology. And then the way you phrase your questions. So a rather large mistake is asking with assumption that your users know how they think. So when it comes to the mental processes, many people don't actually know it. So when you make certain decisions, when you pick the shirt that you want to wear, when you pick the kind of program that you want to use, at the moment, it may seem like you know your mental processes. But if you're, for example, being interviewed in a corporate building, this kind of process doesn't exactly come out as naturally. So when it comes to mental processes, many people don't actually know it. It's not as helpful to just ask, what goes through your mind when you use this? So it's actually much better to draw on aspects like finding out the situations they use it in. So that's why one of the best ways to go through like the research is to have a user journey. So for example, where do you use this kind of product? What is most likely place that you end up using it? Do they use it mostly in the train, on the way to work? And if observing how they currently solve their problems. So when they want to order food, for example, what drives their next choices by what they click? Is it the price, the proximity, the kind of food? So it's also very much unhelpful to actually ask questions like, if we had this feature, would it help you? Because those kinds of questions cannot draw on actionable or recallable facets of the users. So on top of the implication that you should say yes. So when you say things like, oh, but if we offer you this, like, would it help you? It's like, I can't really say for sure because I haven't encountered it. But there's kind of that implication that you should say, yeah, I guess, but that isn't exactly a yes. So yeah, best is actually to observe and draw insights. So I'll actually give like a small like shout out to one of my professors before. His name is Ruben Ilagan. Whenever I come to him with like ideas like, oh, I have a business idea, or like, oh, I have a thing that I want to make, I want to design for. And the first thing he always tells me is, like, Polly, check the way that they solve this now, or like check the way or how they process this kinds of thing. So for example, if I'm making like a certain app or like a platform for a certain set of users, try to assess the way that they go about it now. So for example, I'm making a platform for home cooks to deliver their food to people who want to buy them. It would be best to go through, for example, Facebook pages who have the same function, just to see how people interact, just to see how people address what they want to know, what they want to do, and the kinds of things like what do they include in their posts that are very, very important. So here's the thing that he always tells me, that it's best to observe and draw insights from that before you start doing anything. Not just to understand how they do it, but also to validate if there's a need to make the app or to make the platform, and why this is recommendable than to just keep it in a Facebook page, for example. So second is your users are to feel assured and secure. So this is more of in the very start of user interviews and the user testing. So in the beginning of the interview, always state the reason for the research. It's very bad to leave them in the dark, just to be like, okay, I'm gonna ask you some questions. So it's really scary if you think about that. But then it's more of just to put them into the reason why you're doing this, the reason why it's important to be interviewing them. So in the beginning of the interview, always state the reason for the research and that they can opt out of it anytime. So always give them the agency to decide, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. Maybe because they feel uncomfortable, maybe they feel like some questions they can't exactly answer, but always give the kind of assurance that they need. So all the more important, you should let them know if you'll be recording the conversation and assure them that it'll be in good hands. So you have to be warm and you have to be inviting, so the tone of your voice, but you also have to be neutral enough in the way that you respond. So you have to be neutral enough as not to add or implicate bias into their answers. So you can't be like, oh yeah, that's right, that's so true, like, yeah. But like, it's good to have that kind of speech pattern as a friend. But as a user interviewer, it might not give you or lead them into a direction that is very much their perspective. So Note the tone that you use and always give small confirmations that you're listening. And this is actually very much more important now because we're online. So if you're doing a user interview online, like for example here through Zoom, it's really important to give small confirmations like yeah, like oh yeah, yeah. So just say that, just so that they know that you're still listening and that they still know that the call is still connected. Because there are a lot of times where if you don't say anything, they'll start wondering that, oh, is the call still connected? Is my Wi-Fi wonking out? Something like that. So that's just little small things to note when you have a different platform. So next is, how do you communicate with your design team? So now you have all your data. So for example, if you're UX research, you have all this data from your different users, maybe from surveys, other certain things, and you have a lot on your hands. Great for documentation, but you can't just present this data as is to your product team. So the job of the UX research is to teach the team how to understand the user. So you have to draw out the mindset of how we can properly manifest these findings into something tangible and actionable. Find ways to effectively present your data for them to process it in ways that they can understand it and in the ways that they can start brainstorming what next actions they should do. So you're not exactly there just to tell them that, oh yeah, like 50 users like said this, 50 users said that. Just try to interpret the data in a way that they can really understand what it means to them as members of the product team. So if you have a hard time finding a key question to draw answers from, so you think that, oh, your product team has so many questions that need to be answered. I don't know how I'm going to do this for the people who I'm going to interview. It's really okay to have everyone collaborate, have everyone on board, to be collaborative. It's actually really good to have your entire design team, not just actually your design team, but your entire product team actually, even the back end developers, front end developers, to kind of give questions that they feel they want to know about the users. So when you write them on the sticky notes, to draw, or everything like that, you're able to see if there's like a common delineating question that pops up, and that can be your key question for your interviews. So a good product is pretty much a result of good collaboration. By making sure that your entire product team is on board to what is going on, to what your users are like, what's your client actually looking for, what is their vision, it's much ensured that you will have a product that really has an idea of what is going on for the users and for the vision in mind. So next is actually ethics. So the world likes to revolve around the concept of good and evil and stuff like that. So it's in the stories and the media, but like in UX, there are two key things in terms of ethics and in terms of the practicing of things that are research backed that more or less reflect the same thing. So that is the laws of user experience and dark patterns. So first is the law of UX. So the laws of UX are the laws that would help govern your decision making in design. So there are a lot of laws. But some of the ones that I'll talk about are the ones that stuck with me most. So one of them is called Hicks Law. So the Hicks Law says that the time it takes to make a decision increases with the number and complexity of choices. So why you should simplify choices to lessen the difficulty of the users or structure it in such a way that it's not overwhelming. The second is Miller's Law, which actually is kind of a supplement to Hicks Law. It says that the average person can only keep 7 plus or minus 2 items in their working memory. So it kind of supplements Hicks Law. It kind of helps you think about what kind of or how many decisions or options there should be there, like already. And then the last one actually is called the Pareto principle. So especially in terms of user testing and UX research, it's super important. It says that roughly 80% of the effects, so for example, all the complaints and the bugs and stuff like that, come from 20% of the causes. And likewise, 20% of the effects are from 80% of the causes. And knowing this, it's better for us to focus on the 20% that will actually turn over the largest benefit. Because when you solve that 20%, the 80% of those smaller problems will also disappear along with it. So it's a lot about user testing, about iterations, and about how to optimize the way that you fix your design. So these kinds of laws, they supplement decisions with hefty amounts of research, with human behavior and our capacities, and also serve as a very good foundation. So if you want to make sure that the kinds of things you're learning are very much research backed, then these are a very good place to start. So you just search up laws of UX. There's a whole website about it. The website's absolutely beautiful, so you should check it out. And the second one is actually like an area I'm super interested, not because I want to do it, but because it's very interesting. Like it's very mind-boggling how these work. And it's called dark patterns. So dark patterns, it's intentional deception and dishonesty. It's very intentional. So it's knowing behavior patterns of what we do, the way that we interact with our products, and taking advantage of this to actually dupe the users to make certain decisions. But many dark patterns aren't actually in your face until it's actually too late. So let me give you an example. Wait, I'll just show you like things you can read first. But this is from there's like a Twitter dedicated to dark patterns on Twitter. It's solely dedicated to tweeting and retweeting about people calling out dark patterns that they see online, which is interesting thing to look over on the timeline. So you can just follow them. So it's actually, let me give you an example, a situation that people might really understand. So let's say you're buying an ebook online, an online store, so maybe like Amazon, something like that. So you put it in your cart, but then when you click on checkout, the purchase automatically pushes through. So you're kind of expecting something else, right? You're expecting like a final confirmation that it was your purchase, like they usually do on other e-commerce platforms. But that's what they did. So the ebook only costed you $5. So you let it happen anyway. So it's too big of a hassle over $5 to call to complain for what it costed. But if you think about it, you're just one of the many people who are probably experiencing the same thing. So if there's like thousands of you who are having the exact same gap in the process, that's basically not just $5, but $5,000 that is kind of accidentally made for the benefit of the other person. So behavior known, yeah. Behavior disrupted for an ulterior motive or purpose or check. But some are less obvious. So certain online buying platforms are actually a lot, now that I think of it. Even if you had unchecked items in your cart and then you leave the app, the moment you add another item into the cart, it automatically rechecks everything in your cart that you had left unchecked before. So maybe for you, you don't get fooled like you unchecked it before you checked out. But then some users still mistakenly purchase what should have been unchecked items as this. So if you think about it, that 50 peso thing that you bought may just be 50 pesos to you, but if that's several users who are experiencing the same thing, that is a lot different. So some booking platforms also, what they do, they obscure cheaper flight options by using smaller font sizes and font colors. Like for example, they use gray against white. So they have pre-selected options that cost a lot. So for example, you're gonna buy a ticket for like an airplane. Usually they leave checked certain options that you never consented to, like, oh, you want insurance, you want a hot meal, oh, you want this kind of added baggage and stuff like that. They may seem kind of small, but then you have to think about how many people end up making these mistakes anyway. So an essential part of what a dark pattern is when they kind of show to you that the default is your consent, even if it shouldn't be like that. Like your consent should be explicit. So it shouldn't be vague or anything. They shouldn't have it like auto-check for you to opt out of. So it should be more of an opt-in than to an opt-out, you understand? So as you can see, the biggest deceptions usually come in at the cost of your money, which is crazy, but it makes sense on a profit for them. But then for us, money isn't just a joke for us. So it's kind of crazy how so much dark patterns exist in platforms that require your money. So there's disruption and there's deceptive design. So for many times, yes, these deceptive designs are made for the metrics. So they want to skew the amount of people who do signups, the amount of people who download, and maximizing profit in whatever way they can. For them, it's a good thing. For us, it's just not ethical. And it's at the cost of ethics. So next is actually inclusivity. So there are users, and among those users, there are actually people who have difficulties in various functions. And these users are just as important. So not just including your users, but the groups within those users who experience key difficulties. So inclusivity is done through representation. So meaning this, so as much as you possible when you can, you have to implement design decisions and even coding decisions, basically product team decisions that will help them. You have to read up on sources that can supplement the kind of knowledge for these decisions. Now, there's a lot of resources for these for very specific inclusivity methods. So for example, it's like, color theory, stuff like that. So a small example would be that web readers that people use. So for example, people who have a difficulty in seeing, they rely on web readers to read the website for them. Now, these web readers, they rely on alternate text of images. So they rely on these to tell a person who has difficulty in seeing what is being shown. So if you don't include alternate text or alternate captions in your code, or captions that can be read anyway in your design, this might be a very big dark spot for your users. And it may seem just like a small thing for you not to put alternate text, to leave your images to be keyboard smash.png, but it will come a long way for these kinds of people. So another is actually color contrast triggers. So this is especially for people who have difficulty in perceiving certain colors. So if the color choices you choose aren't able to contrast effectively, they'll basically look like the same thing for certain people. And that's not good in terms of hierarchy or in terms of putting boundaries on what are grouped together and what are not. So another and all the more important is languages. So UX writing is also very much important. So is the writing right for users? Or does it imply less than favorable tones? So are the words used universally known, or do they use phrases that may leave others more confused? Is the UX writing going to leave a comforting or condescending feeling? So UX writing is extremely important, especially on matters that are very sensitive. So for example, if it's someone who wants you to design something for, let's say, like an LGBT positive website and stuff like that, what if the UX writing is by someone who doesn't realize that there's certain things that you can't say about these people, or there's certain things that may come across as okay for you, but then don't actually imply favorable tones for them. So for UX writing, it's more just about trying to collaborate effectively and trying to understand the implications of what you write. So especially, for example, if it's health related, do you want to make it sound like it's going to be the end of the world for them? That the first thing that they see is probably the worst thing that they should see, or should it show the possibilities in a neutral way that shows it, that doesn't let them panic? It's kind of those kinds of decisions that may change the way that users interact with your product and the kinds of feelings that they have for your product. There's a long, long list of means to incorporate these kinds of things. It's very exhaustive, but then it's really important to understand these kinds of implications. So there's going to be many times where you iterate, and might as well try to read up on the ways that you can integrate these kinds of inclusive methods so that you can apply it slowly but surely in each iteration. But ultimately, as much as possible, we have to address different population groups, consider varying accesses to technology. So for example, when you're designing like a certain thing, some people in the world may not be able to see this certain gradient, or they won't be able to see this certain picture. So you have to think about how these differences and these gaps in these certain aspects will affect the way people interact with your website, the kind of information that they take from your website. Because although it may seem very small for you, it may really come across a long way for other users. So you have to have a clear and proper UX writing also, especially if you want to have a certain tone or a certain atmosphere that you want to set with your user. So there are actually very key things I want to talk about. So just to close it, number one, good design is not profit driven, but it's human driven. So as early as now, please equip yourself with the mindset that to be a good UX researcher is to be a truth seeker, and you have to keep it close to your heart. So you're not here to validate the assumptions of your boss, but to teach the product team how to understand the users. So at the end of everything, if a product doesn't align with the user, it just won't connect. So next time you create questions for the interview or for the testing or for the observing, the next time you sit in front of your user, you have to ask yourself, is what I am doing truth finding? Is this the best way to see the mindset of the user? And to remind yourself that you are not them. even if you're part of the user group, even if you're exactly the user group, when you are the one interviewing, you are not them. Number two, good design is a symptom of good user research. So great design is not determined by the designer, but how a designer learns the design that is inside the user's head. So if we think about it, there really exists a design in your user. It's just that they can't exactly manifest this into a physical design. It's the way that they think. It's the way that they perceive certain aspects. It's what they search for when they interact with a certain product, what they're looking at. And how sincere you are in understanding the behaviors of the user will reflect in this. So there's no one size fits all in user research. There's no recycling of personas, even with the clients with similar business models. Like just because they're kind of the same between Shopee and Lazada doesn't mean you should replicate it for both. So as much as possible, do not recycle your user personas as much as you think it may fit. Because before you know it, it just doesn't. So there's no recycling, so even with similar business models. So you want research decisions that are not only aligned to what's best to learn about the user, but also what's best for your team to understand the user and the product in question. So UX research doesn't just stop at gathering the data, but also in how you interpret this data and pass it on to your product team. If you just give them the whole document and just be like, 22% chose this, 50% chose that, it doesn't really say much to a designer. And they can't make much insights about it because you were the one who very much humanely interacted with these users. So it's really get your entire product team on board with this whole process. And you more or less will see how this manifests into a collaborative effort and how this actually manifests into great product design. So number three, good design is inclusive design. So you practice means to check if your design may not line up with practices that are inclusive, especially those who experience certain difficulties. At the very start, it's okay if it doesn't have that at the very beginning for your MVP. It's not that easy to incorporate all these certain things into your first try. And that's completely okay. There's a reason why apps have so many versions. And there's a reason why even big brands like Instagram and Facebook keep changing and changing and changing the way that they design their app. I mean, if you think about it, they didn't really have to. But then they start adding more things that change the way people observe and change the way that people interact with their product. So you have to practice these kinds of things, and you have to think if the color choices and arrangement make boundaries clear to the colorblind. Did your team include alternate text or captions? Are there animations or transitions that may disrupt certain users? Or for example, animations that may affect the way the website is perceived by those who don't have as much accessibility to the design. So these may seem like very nitty-gritty details to you, but for these users, these decisions mean a lot. And number four, so good design is an evolving design. So rarely are designs perfect on the first try. I kind of mentioned that with your Instagram and Facebook. And that's absolutely fine. So the world's consumption of technology and design change by the day. So you shouldn't feel bad that you have to change something like every few weeks or something like that. There's a reason why iterations are part of the cycle. So what matters first and foremost is that you practice and evolve with as a practitioner who is human-driven and inclusive. So in that way, I really want to say that design is political. So I'd like to end on this note because all the more in user experience, as you grow in this field, introspection will go a really long way. So if you're starting out in your journey, as early as now, just keep in mind this kind of quote. So there's a responsibility that comes with research and design. So will you take the path of less resistance and follow your boss or some higher up to choose a design that is more for profit and possibly even harmful for users? Or will you strive to retain the ethics of responsibility and ensure that the choices you make are for your users? So we can only hope you chose the latter. So for the design to be human-centered, it doesn't actually start with your users, it actually starts with you. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Yes.
Thank you so much, Polly, for the talk. Just some questions before we tackle the Q&A portion. I just wanted to ask if you could re-clarify, because there is like product terms like persona and so on and so forth. Even though we're familiar with it, the audience may not be as familiar. So like put it in layman terms. so we can
Yeah.
like all understand it better. Thank you.
So when I said that you can't recycle your personas, so the personas in the UX design process, they basically are a more efficient way to represent your users. So for example, it's like making like a mock identity. Like for example, oh, my name is Sam. I'm 24. I want my goal right now is to find of, to find food that is not just cheap but also healthy. I'm athletic. It's like there's very certain things you can include in a persona. So it very much depends on the kind of product you're working on. So you usually make personas after you draw a lot of research. So after the research, you find out just what kind of people are your users. What are like the key differences who are still your users. So for example, is your product used by someone who is, for example, in the age bracket 15 to 17, but your product is also used by people who are 30 to 50, for example. The personas are a way to kind of, I wouldn't say simplify, but to present what are like the differences. So, for example, um, so for certain personas, they like to include what are the apps that you use. So for example, someone in the age of 30 to 50 can have choices like, oh, I use Yahoo Mail more, I use the mail app of the iPhone that came with the iPhone. But then while the younger users use, for example, Gmail. So these kinds of things will actually supplement the way that you choose your design. So for example, older users may prefer credit card over other choices like PayPal, something like that. So they're basically like short biographies, a kind of way to really put into perspective the kind of users you have. So it's like basically looking at a whole person, but then they actually represent a group. So that's for the personas.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. And so with
Yeah.
that,
Oh,
oh,
that's
go on.
super cool,
Sorry.
Polly. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, I think personas are a great way of, helping any designers on a team just be on the same page about, I guess, the idea of what the representation of the user might look like, getting a sense of, their behaviors and goals and needs. Um, so I just wanted to say that if anyone in the audience wanted to ask a question, you can raise your hand on Zoom and we can unmute you, or you can
Yeah.
just type out the question on the Zoom chat and we'll read it out. There's also a Poliv link that you can use if you want to ask anonymously. So I think we already have some questions there. Thank you guys for asking and for coming again.
All right. We'll then go ahead with the Q&A portion. Aside from gathering questions from the audience, I'll be asking some of my own questions and from the team as well. Okay, so first question, so that people can fully understand what the product is. Can you share with us your experiences of some products you've been a part of in your UX journey?
So a
Part
lot
of
of
like
what,
you helped make.
yeah. So a lot of what I worked on was actually more of like the very much UX research aspect of processes. So a lot of what I worked on was actually more of like the client research. So usually it's like the first interviews we have with our client. So what I did before, I can't exactly say what client works they are since it's not okay. Like I can't exactly say who it is. But then there are certain clients
Oh
where
yeah, it's okay.
like there are certain clients where you know more or less who they are because they exist in the same school as you, right? So the kind of way you can approach this is, card sorting. So running post-its like, oh, what is your org? What is the vision that it implies? What does it want to achieve? But then when you interact with clients, for example, who are outside of school and but probably pretty much outside your area of knowledge. So, for example, what if your client was someone who was trying to do like a thing about basketball and about reservations on basketball? It's like for you, it's so out of touch. Because for me, for one, I know basketball, but not enough to say something about it. And also because I have never been the kind of person to do that kind of service. So for the product team to deal with that kind of client is really difficult because they have no context and no experience whatsoever. So in the client research, the thing that I did instead was actually do a whiteboard session. So the whiteboard session what it does, it actually does a loop in terms of question and answer. So for example, I started with what is the name of your startup? So for example, what is the name of your startup? And then what is the unique selling proposition? So when they say the unique selling proposition, you can start asking questions like, oh, how does this manifest in what you want to give? So they start saying things like, oh yeah, we can offer them this thing, you can offer them that thing. And you can just keep on expounding and expounding while also giving opportunities for your client to actually share certain things. So when the session happened, the client ended up opening up about why we started doing this. Oh, like we were a group of friends in high school or in college. We do this thing together and we realized that it's really difficult. We want to make it easier for people. And this kind of way made it a lot easier for the product team to understand what they're working with. So not only did it build good rapport with our client because we're basically talking to them as if we were friends, but also a good way to onboard your product team into the vision and into what the what the client has in mind. So and like yeah, those are like the ones that I can say about UX research and actually more specifically the interviews with clients.
All right, thank you. All right, now let's ask a question from the audience from Denise. Do you have any tips on getting your product team on board with designing something human-centered as opposed to something profit-driven in the case that your product team or boss is creating a product that's supposed to drive profit?
It's like a very interesting question to ask. So I mean, like if it's for example, like a company itself, I think for many designers, you have to ask what kind of company do you want to work for to begin with. So some people would really think like, oh, there are certain companies I don't want to work for because this is the kind of environment they have, this is the kind of goals that they want to do, and basically it doesn't feel like a very ethical place to be in. But then in terms of client work, that's not exactly a kind of freedom that we can have. So whenever your client wants to do something like that, what really drives people in upper positions, clients and stuff like that is numbers. So I attended a talk by how do I say it? It was a talk by someone who worked in SM. Basically, he wanted to make it more environmental friendly, which is crazy because it's SM, right? But then what he did is that he used numbers to persuade them. So he said na, oh, by lowering the air condition by a certain number of degrees, we save this amount of money. And they were automatically were like, yes, let's do it, something like that. So it's a very interesting way to understand the way that it works. So if they're very profit driven, the thing about using dark patterns is that it's like if you use dark patterns, it's profit driven, but it's very short term. So it doesn't assure the longevity of your product. If anything, when people use dark patterns, it draws people away from their product. So eventually, if they find a product that does better or doesn't give this kind of this kind of insane decisions, or they don't have the kind of products that kind of want to go inside your security or something like that, they will choose it over you. So I think one of the driving ways to do so is really just to choose and find a way to appeal to that person in the way that they want to hear. Because yeah, and also trying to make sure that you yourself are strong enough to really push for what is right. So it's really difficult if your client is like is like that. But then there are ways around it. So even the way you talk to them, you can kind of persuade them that, oh yeah, but like if we do that, blah 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 percent of users will leave our site, like they won't go there anymore or something like that. And that kind of thing really resonates with people who are profit driven, with people who are metrics driven. Because even if it does work for them, if they know that it's going to cause a decline in their users, they will think twice. So that's one thing.
Thank you. Now a question from me, like it's like a multi question. Okay, so first, how did you get into UX as a student? And then second, how did you decide on your niche of research when you were getting into UX? How did you decide from like PM, design, so on and so forth? And finally, any tips you can offer to people starting out in UX for choosing that niche of theirs?
Okay. Okay, so the way I got into UX, it's like, I don't know, I'd say it's like a long story of like domino. So for example, number one, there was when I shifted to Isabel and I entered Develop. Because before Develop, all I wanted to do was become a veterinarian. So I just wanted to play with dogs and stuff. And I was so close to choosing that when choosing a college. But then for me, I realized that in my time with Develop, understanding and going through like technology was really something I was interested in. Back in that day, I was more interested into entrepreneurship over technology because I didn't exactly have the kind of skill set that people in that school were equipped with already when I arrived. But then when I went into Ateneo, I joined UX Society. So I joined UX Society because I mean I heard about a lot of people there. I met some people who were there at the time. For example, like Alexis, Brian Tan, stuff like that. So when I entered UX Society, I kind of just wanted to serve more of like a role like HR because yeah, I basically chose HR first because I really feel myself to be a people-oriented person. Even if I mean, actually now I realize that I'm actually an introvert, not an extrovert, which is kind of crazy. But then just because I'm an introvert doesn't mean I'm not like interested in people. I mean, people watching is a thing. So yeah, right. So in HR, I kind of really got to know people, trying to understand that the way that they behave and stuff like that. And I really found that it was a thing that I felt myself resonate with. Like I really wanted to learn more about people and stuff like that. And when in terms of UX, I wasn't confident yet in terms of design. Technically, in first year, that was the only time I actually started designing for real. So I was only starting to learn Photoshop in first year. So just literally like mga last year, I was learning what Photoshop was and stuff like that. And even if I did arts before, I didn't really know like these kinds of principles. So by doing HR, that's when I realized that I was very much concerned with like the research aspect. I like talking to people, I like understanding them, and I like finding ways to interpret these things, you like numerically, qualitatively, whatever. And when I became the VP for Human Resources in last year, they started inviting me to do the UX research aspects or the client research aspects of the client work. And that's when I really realized that I really like doing this because number one, it really puts you in front of like the users, it puts you in front of the client. And for me, I just genuinely want to find out more about them. Like, why did you want to do the startup? Like, why did you want to make this website? Like, why was the Facebook page not enough? I mean, these questions sound kind of aggressive, but like, I really mean it like sincerely. Like, why did they make these kinds of questions? And then for me, that really made me realize that I really wanted to delve deeper into UX research because of that aspect of me that was really drawn to people. So for people who kind of want to start in terms of UX and in finding your niche, it's more of trying to understand number one what you want to learn and number two what you feel resonates with you more. Like just not just in terms of what you're good at, but also in terms of in what aspect do you have a hunger for knowledge for. So for example, for me, even if there's UX design, for me, I just really want to get into like how do I properly ask questions? How do I properly interact with people? And not as much into the design aspect. So it's really more of about what can you see yourself doing and keep doing and not be tired of it. Because as much as you want to do certain things, if it's a kind of job that really makes you emotionally exhausted, in the end, it won't be good for you in the long term. So I'd say don't pressure yourself. Like technically, you will find the aspects that you want to do, and also always take opportunities when you can. So even if you're not fully confident yet, honestly, one of the best people I've worked with always started with having the humility to say that I have a lot to learn. So those kinds of people I always end up working the best with because those were always the very growth-minded people. So always be open to learning, always be open to opportunities because you never know if that's something that you're actually good at and actually want to do if you don't try it out. And you shouldn't be afraid of making mistakes because we're in college, more or less a lot of us are on the same boat. So now is like the perfect time to learn, make some mistakes, and then make even better solutions.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, next question. Let's get more into the career topic since everyone seems to be worrying about that nowadays. So, do you have tips on for getting a UX internship locally here? Because I know like most information online, it's very like US international based.
Actually, like, interestingly, a lot of startups in the PH scene are very much shifting to work from home. I guess one of the reasons because it maximizes productivity, so it cuts down a lot of transportation time. Number two, innately because of the nature of their job. So they're, it's like mostly tech and startups, UX design. They know that the kind of jobs that they can do can be done remotely. So for like getting into these kinds of things, I guess it's really more of about how you market yourself, like for example, your research. And if you take the opportunities you can get, even if they weren't exactly like your magnum opus, like you can still include it. Like you can still include what you learned from it, and that's okay. But if it's in terms of UX, I would say that anything that's design oriented, it's okay to put your personality into it. So your resume can have your personality. Your portfolio website can have your personality. So you can really put, for UX, you can really put just case studies. So even a few is okay, as long as you're confident with them, as long as you really write how much you learned about it. So in terms of case studies, like for example, there's the context, the problem, how you kind of use these kinds of researches and how you manifest them into a physical product. So just really get into even a few things that you're interested in. In terms of finding the internships, actually, a lot of it is really about trying to get to know people who may know those internships. So
Like connections, basically.
yeah, but I mean, in college, it's more or less easier to find because you can just join the orgs that are aligned with what you want to do and just really try to just get to know people because they will share like if there are internship opportunities like in your member groups. Yeah, like in your member groups, they'll add you to communities, they'll tell you all about them. And it's just letting yourself go down that rabbit hole. In finding on internships, like honestly, UX did open a lot of doors. Like literally after my interview with Brian Tan, he dragged me to a workshop for sketch. Like literally right after. He was like, "Oh, you wanna go to like a workshop?" I was like, "Okay." That's where I met Alexis in person. So it's just like, uh. But in terms of finding these internships, there are a lot of places online. But that is true when they say that a large percent of internship openings aren't actually publicized, and that's, I mean, in a way that's kind of sad. But then all the more you should take your opportunities when you can. Try to get to know the people and the kind of journey you want to go through. Ask people who do UX research, what do you do, what's it like doing this kind of job, whatever. And then eventually you will find places. And then don't be afraid to send emails. Emails are probably like super unnerving for a lot of people.
Cold email.
Like even me, like someone who used to send emails like every single day, like until now, it's really unnerving, especially if it's about internships and stuff. Like I feel so kinakabahan, like, oh, am I typing this correctly? Am I coming off correctly? But like, like it's really true that you get zero shots in if you don't make any chances. So you really have to send the emails and just try to make sure that your grammar is correct. So it's more of just understanding that everyone is more or less in the same boat as you. Everyone is trying to learn and trying to understand and eager to learn. So it's really okay to like be unsure with yourself, but it's not about the unsureness. It's more of about what you're going to do from where you are now. So it's okay to kind of be like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm good enough for that. That kind of humility is also good. And there's really no better way than to really get yourself into it. And you shouldn't be afraid to do that because everyone's in the situation where they're still learning right now.
All right. Speaking of learning, we have a question from the Polev. Do you have any suggestions as to resources to learn UX design? You can name books, websites, videos that help you, and we'll like send them to chat.
I'm trying to remember but like a very good place to start. The first thing I downloaded was actually from Interaction Design. So if you search it up, there's Interaction Design, and you can actually download for free if you just put your email there. I know it's like a newsletter thing, but like you can download like their fundamentals of user experience like on the go. But then if it's in terms of like introducing yourself in the UX, how it's important, you should probably read I forgot the name, but it's one by Norman, the one about the Norman door. I forgot the name of the book title, but it's really, really good.
That's the design of everyday things.
Yes, it's really good.
I have it right here, actually.
You can get it.
Yeah, I'm not yet done with it yet.
I've been looking for a physical copy. I have the online copy lang, but I want to get the physical one after. So I can
booked. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good place to start. But like actually even online, like there's so many different videos you can just play in the background and stuff to get yourself into what UX is all about. And that's completely okay. You can go watch Alexis Colgado's YouTube channel, and that's perfectly fine. Like he introduces a lot of things interestingly. There's a lot of channels to talk about it. You can also listen to Alexis Colgado's Roots on Spotify or Apple that talk about you can share a lot about like there's a lot of people like a lot of Alexis Collado. You can go and you can get into UXPH, get to know the people there. I think the best ways to find resources is first to find the communities. So that's why if you're interested in UX, you should join UX Society because we kind of share those on a very frequent basis. So there's that. And then it's really just trying to find out your communities. So a lot of communities now, they're super open to people just joining in, just saying stuff. So for example, there's one called Design Buddies that my friends has just added me into recently. I can like, send like a join link later or something. I can see like you're like, yeah, you can just see it. Like yeah, so it's basically a Discord server with a bunch of different designers, including UX, UI, whatever, UX researchers, stuff like that, where they share like a lot of stuff. It's from people all around the world. So I don't interact much, but when they send stuff, I do open it. So good for me. Yeah, it's this like it's Design Buddies. So it's to find sources, you can easily search, but to find sources recurringly, like repetitively, that you know are reliable, find the communities first, and they will come to you.
You're muted.
Sorry. Question from the chat. Is there a framework or steps to follow when doing UX research and design?
I mean, there always exists like a framework. So there's always like the one with iterations, like the whole design process. So from ideating to empathizing, designing, prototyping, there's like the usual thing. But then in terms of UX research, there are frameworks. But then even in terms of research and design, it's really more about knowing which one works with your situation. So as I said earlier, for UX research, there is no one size fits all. The kind of things that you do for a certain client probably won't work for another client. That's incredibly different. So it's for you, it's just to get into introspection, just trying to understand when certain practices are best for certain clients. There are frameworks. I mean, there are a lot you can find out there that you can find. There's, I think the ones that you should find for are probably what personas should have and user journeys. Those two are probably one of the most important aspects of like data that you find from user research that is presentable to your product team. So those two are really important. But then the first one, yeah, like research itself, there are a lot of frameworks, but it's more of finding the right one for the process that you're going to use, for the product that you're going to make for.
I can read out Pau's question in the chat. And don't worry, I don't think that question has been asked before.
Yeah.
So they're asking if your work ever overlaps with UI and if there's a clear distinction that you draw between the work of the two.
For me personally, I mean, like, okay, some internships, they really like putting UI/UX, and then that makes me really nervous because, I mean, for me, a lot of people like to put UI/UX and research into one position, And not naman saying that they shouldn't, but then you should understand that each one has its own delve. So you can get super into UX research that is like as a separate practice than from UX design from UI. And it makes sense because in UX research, there's so many different possibilities and there's so many different studies that you can do, which might be overwhelming if you do all three. In terms of UI, I don't really I don't really know how to because I mean like user experience does have user interfaces, but then a lot of user interface as we know depends on the brand. But then yun nga, like it does overlap with UI if you're designing. Definitely like some people take it as the same thing. And definitely it can be the same thing. But for me, UX research doesn't if I'm doing just UX research, it's not about overlapping. It's more about supplementing what they're going to make. So for UX research, it's more of about, for example, our main user group, they cannot, like, apparently have a difficulty in reading certain things. So they're the kinds of people who have to make their text bigger. So for that, usually you'd have to consult with the UX UI designer and just let them know that, oh, there's um, like these users, they might need for the font to be bigger, to be readable, because they're at like the age where this becomes a difficulty for them. So it's not that UX research overlaps with UI. In terms of the job titles, they really might. Like UX isn't that old in terms of the Philippine context. So there will be a lot of instances where you search for a job for UX and you see research and UX and UI all in the same thing. But it's really more about um, in the work itself. If you're doing UX research, ideally you are working with the UX UI people, but then your work delves deeper into it than they do. So for me, there's a clear distinction between UX researcher and UX design as disciplines. I mean, jobs may not be the same. But then for me personally, there is a distinction because there's so much practice and there's so much things to learn about them by themselves that I feel can be overwhelming for one person.
Yeah, maybe you can also think about it in terms of the expected like deliverables and outputs that you'd have as a user researcher as opposed to a UI designer. Because UI
Yeah.
is just like the visual
Yeah.
components.
Yeah. Because I mean, I guess like the UI, like usually just show you like the mockups, but then they might also imply that you should also have prototypes and stuff. For UX research, usually they really only ask for like the data and how this data is interpreted into the personas, which is basically like a light version of your user groups and your user journey, which puts them into the context of what is going on when they're using the app and key things to consider in the interactions. So a UX researcher actually ends up working a lot with UI and UX as expected, but then we don't exactly do their job. More like we work with them to make sure that what we found out reflects what is being given. So I would say if, for example, we're working at the same time, the UX researcher is the one that starts putting comments and things like, oh, I feel like this component may not be, I feel like this component needs bigger text or the color may serve to be difficult for the certain user group. So in a way, the user researcher can help with the interactions in terms of like how like yeah like the flow of things. For example, and a lot of UX research also include information architecture, for example. So the way that it should flow accordingly to what we got from the research. It really depends on which kind of jobs, but usually those are the kinds of things that we ask for. And in terms of our work, it's really a very collaborative effort that we have to assert with the product team.
All right, thank you so much, Polly. Any other questions? No? All right. Thank you guys for coming to Develop's Tech Talks. Tomorrow we'll have Graham in the morning, Coding for Good. So if you do enjoy this talk, please consider going tomorrow. Again, thank you
Yeah,
so much, Polly, for sharing your insights.
thank
And
you.
thank you everyone else for going.
Ollie, what's next for you? What are you up to in terms of design?
Oh God, I'm actually having to choose like stuff about my internship. I won't say what I'm applying for, but I only applied to two. mainly because they align with what I want to do. So one of them is more long term, not in terms of like the thing, but in terms of what we're working on. So it's already a built product, and it's more of like the thing about this is it's so interesting because the user group is very interesting to work with. So and then I wanted to really delve into it because I wanted to understand like why these people choose this app and the difficult part of it that I wanted to really tackle because they told me the challenge and I liked it. It was because, for example, for for apps, it's easy to add features, but it's super not easy to decrease them. So for this app, there's like a lot of things in it. It's overwhelming. But for us to remove things is not easy because, as you know, it can really change the way that the
Yes, the
users
users.
interact. Yeah, for me, it's a really challenging thing to do, but all the more it makes me excited to work on it. The second one is more, it's more into client work. So it's not exactly like a long term kind of thing. It just depends on the client work that comes in. And for me, I also like delve more into that just to try to see different kinds of clients, different kinds of user researches. But then, yeah, like I'm at like the break point if I have to choose only one, if one of them doesn't allow to have two at the same time, or if I can just take two. And I think if I had the decision, I would take two because right now I feel like it's the best time for me because there's no school. Because when there's school, kasi, like I feel so emotionally drained, like just going around campus and then like having to like
Okay, I think Polly froze, unless it's just me.
Hello, Polly.
Hello. Oh no,
Um,
we lost
every-
her.
everyone else, is she frozen for you? We go like technical difficulty.
Goodbye, Polly.
Holly, hello. She laughed. She's laughing. She's moving.
I'm back.
Welcome back.
What was I saying?
The way I thought I was frozen.
I stopped. I was like, but
We were
yeah,
talking about doing two internships.
yeah, I was like, for me, if I had like the decision to take two, I would. Because when school comes, I don't feel like I have the emotional capacity. I don't think I have the emotional capacity to do even a single internship. That's why last intersession, I actually chose not to anymore because I felt super drained from second sem. So for me, I wanted to take like a break for myself. And then now when I think about it, I have more command over my own time. I have more command over the things I can do that I'll have to walk around this hot app campus or go to a meeting in this other city. So for me, I think I'm okay with taking two internships at once. It's just going to depend on which, if they're both okay with that. So yeah.
Go for the hustle, bro.
Yeah, man. It's
Thank you
okay.
so much, Polly. That was so cool to hear.
Thank you.
We're looking forward
Good
to seeing your
luck
portfolio
with
evolve in
that.
the internship. Your Notion portfolio looks great. Everyone, feel free to connect with Polly. I sent her LinkedIn in the chat. And yeah,
Join
Where's that
UX.
Notion? Yeah.
Don't look at it. It's not. It's like
Polly's.
it's currently on its bare bones. So I'm gonna be adding more pa. So
This is Polly's portfolio. Thank you for
stop.
coming.
It's on the. I'm gonna add more pa kasi there. Because yun nga, I only put enough for my internships